I'm a father. I have 2 little boys. It is never my will to discipline them. Like dads don't walk around saying, well, good dads don't, I think I'll spank my kids right now, right? It's never from the heart. It's not something you want to do, but for the sake of growing them into mature people, there's discipline involved. And so Saul, on the road to Damascus to persecute Christians and possibly kill some or beat them, whatever, Jesus puts a stop to it. So unless you got your whatever condition on your way to go kill some Christians, it probably wasn't God. That's good news. Probably. Let's see here. What else? Oh, so that was the first 3 litmus tests. The fourth one. One more thing I want to say about the nature of God. God's nature is revealed in his name. Okay? So like in Scripture, he reveals himself as, for instance, Jehovah Sidkenu, the Lord our righteousness. Right? Jehovah Nisi, the Lord our banner. Jehovah Shalom, the Lord our peace. Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is there. Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals you. All right. The Lord our righteousness, is he ever not righteous? No. Will he ever do anything that is not righteous? No. Will he ever contradict his nature? No. His nature is revealed in his name. Jehovah Shalom, the Lord our peace. Even in the times when God would bring destruction in the earth, it was to bring about peace. He's always making peace. That's his goal. And in fact, Isaiah, when he talks about righteousness, he says that the fruit of righteousness will be quietness and confidence forever. It'll be peace. See? So righteousness is working out a result, which is this peace. God is always on this mission of bringing absolute peace to the outworking of his righteousness. All right. He's not only doing that in the whole world, but he's doing it in each and every one of us. All right. So yeah, he's always the Lord our peace. That never stops. That peace never stops working. So when he is the Lord our healer, what does that tell you about his nature? He doesn't afflict people from the heart. That's not his nature. You see it? His nature is to heal. And so Jesus, the exact representation of the Father's being, the one who said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, comes, walks this earth, and he heals every single person who comes to him, calls out to him, has someone else come on their behalf, reaches out and touches the hem of his garment. He never said, I'm sorry, it's not my Father's will to heal you.
Yeah.
He never said, I'm sorry, my Father is building character in you. You'll have to be a leper for a few more weeks. We say those things, but Jesus never said those things. We say those things because it makes us more comfortable in our lack of results. Jesus also never said, I'm sorry, you don't have enough faith. You see? He never blamed the sick person for not being healed because it never happened that the sick person wasn't healed. It always worked for him. Think about that for a second. If the sick person must be any part of the equation other than just letting someone minister to them, if the sick person has to be any part of the equation, then Jesus could not have had 100% results. You can't tell me that Jesus, how would I put this? Jesus, thank you. Yeah, you can't tell me that Jesus would just, or that every person who came to Jesus had perfect faith. And that somehow today we don't, right? I mean, Jesus was constantly picking on his own disciples for their lack of faith. I shouldn't say constantly, but often. And I realized one day, if I'm never being rebuked for my own lack of faith, am I really following the same Jesus? I found out it's okay to be corrected for my unbelief or my lack of faith or anything like that. So a little bit of what you'll hear today, unfortunately, is just to say, hey, we the church need to wake up and actually trust more in this area, okay? Now, faith for one thing is different from faith for another. So let me make sure I'm clear on something. I'm not questioning anybody's salvation, okay? It's like I trust my wife. I have complete faith in her. Okay? I trust her with my kids, and the evidence of my faith is the fact that I'm here talking to you and she's back in Michigan taking care of my children, and I'm not wondering, are my kids okay, right? I might be a little wondering because she sent me a picture of my 4-year-old boy with nail polish on today, but Jesus help him. Anyhow. But yeah, I don't question my wife's a great mom. She's wonderful. So what do? I that's faith. But imagine I'm on the roof of my house and my wife says, jump, I'll catch you. No, not a chance. Does that mean we're not married? No. Does that mean I don't trust her to be a good mom? No. It just means in this one thing, I'm questioning whether or not she actually can do it. I got a friend who was like, I don't know, I know your wife, she's pretty tough. I think she can catch you. See, the limitations only exist between our own ears. And we decide what God is able to do and what he isn't able to do. I'm not telling you that you're putting restrictions on God. What I'm saying is that God has chosen to restrict himself to the context of relationship with you. Yeah. Think about that for a second. Right now, Jesus could snap his fingers and appear to every lost person on the planet, preach the gospel to them, and do it better than you or me. But he doesn't do it. Why? Because he sent you. This is all about union with him, partnership, relationship, friendship with God, knowing him intimately, and being his representatives in the earth. Jesus could snap his fingers right now and heal every sick person on the planet, but he doesn't. Why? He sent you. We have a mission in this. We have a role to play. People ask me, see, I'm convinced now that it's always God's will to heal. My fourth litmus test, it's the strongest and the weakest at the same time. I'll tell you why in a second. The fourth one is this: it works. It's the strongest litmus test because if I come up with all these three things and I put these things into practice and try and spend years hammering away at it and nothing ever happens, it's not true. I can just scrap it, right? But if I put all these three things together, these first three litmus tests, and I come to a conclusion and I put it into practice and it works, I think we've arrived at something. But it's also the weakest litmus test. Because Jesus said there will be lying signs and wonders and false prophets that work miracles and all those things. So the presence of miracles does not automatically validate the theology. But the absence of miracles should make us question the theology. Does that make sense? So that's where I come from. I'm like, I want Jesus to receive everything he paid for. After 3 months of studying, I came to the conclusion God always wants to heal. And it was a hard conclusion to come to because still to this day, not everybody I lay hands on gets healed. But I look at the life and ministry of Jesus, and he turned no one away. Now, I know there's questions, and I had all of the questions. What about Paul's thorn in the flesh? What about Jacob's limp? What about Job? What about Paul leaving Trophimus sick in Miletus? What about the city of unbelief? What about? Millions of questions. I brought every one of those questions to the scripture, and my fear was that I was going to have to do a bunch of mental gymnastics to convince, put a square peg in a round hole and make it work. But what I found was I was actually doing the mental gymnastics before. Once I accepted that healing was God's will and that he actually wanted it, I just read the scripture at face value and the questions answered themselves. Fascinating stuff. Now, what I'm going to do today, this morning, right now it's, my watch says 1:47. I'm from Michigan.
Over there. There it is.
Oh, it's back there. There we go. Okay, it's about 10:47. So, what I want to do is we're just going to talk a little bit. This morning, I'm going to do a little bit preachy, all right, if that's all right. But then we're going to take a little break. I understand there's some food in the basement here, so we'll make sure you have some food in your tummy. And then I'm going to do a rather extensive question and answer period at the end. So you can ask all your questions, and if any of those things I listed off or any of the things I didn't list off are your big questions about God's will to heal, I want you to feel free to ask away. And I'll give you some more instruction on that and my disclaimers and all that about how I don't know everything, but I'll give it my best shot. So, But here's what I want to do this morning. Oh, it's over here. I could not shake this morning this desire or this need to share with you something that is not specifically about healing, but it has everything to do with healing. I don't know how much of it I'm going to get to share because I'm just going to kind of, spout, okay? I'm going to go to the scripture. We're going to go to John 14, and I'm hoping to get a little into 15. Maybe not, probably not the whole 15, but I'm hoping to do all of John 14 and a little bit of 15. My goal here is to awaken your heart to the reality of what God has called you to. Now I'm going to be, if you've got an app on your phone and you're trying to choose a version, I'm going to be using the NIV. Perfect. If you've got another version you like more, it is probably more holy than mine, but God bless you. It'll work too. All right. So John 14, let me set some context here. Just before John 14 is John 13. Surprise! All right. And so what happens in John 13 is we start to see Jesus washes his disciples' feet. They celebrate the Passover meal together. They take communion, the first communion, right? And so here comes John 14. Now, just before this, just a few verses before John 14:1, Jesus tells Peter that he's going to, before the rooster crows, you'll disown me 3 times. So just after he says those words, that's the last verse of 13, here's what he says in John 14:1. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Remember, he just told Peter, you're going to disown me and deny me, and you're going to blow it, Pete. He says, don't worry. Verse 2, my Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I'm going. I want to pause here for a second. There's a lot in this little package right here. It's amazing. First things first, I want you to see that Jesus believes in you. He's rooting for you. He just said to the same guy that he knows is going to deny him, I'm going to go prepare a place for you. Okay? I think sometimes we have this idea that God is up in heaven just constantly scowling at us. Like, you're never going to make it.
Yeah.
Because that's how we treat ourselves sometimes. But instead, Jesus is like, listen, Pete, you're going to disown me 3 times even before tomorrow morning. But I'm going to prepare a place for you. Now, here's the other beautiful thing. He says, in my Father's house. What was the place that Jesus called my Father's house? He said, my Father's house shall be called a house of prayer. What was he talking about? The temple, right? The temple in Jerusalem. So Jesus, here he says, I'm going there to prepare a place for you, but he's not talking about the actual temple on earth. See, when you read the book of Hebrews, you find out that when Moses was on the mountain, he saw the temple in heaven, really the tabernacle, if you will. He saw the real thing. And then Hebrews says that the tabernacle, the temple, everything that was made on earth was this shadow, this copy, this type of everything that was there. Okay? And what's cool to me, I love when I read the Old Testament and you see these things, like Moses comes down off the mountain, he gives these basic instructions, and when you read how they put the thing together, it explains the craftsmen who God gifted to make everything, Bezalel and Aholiab, and they're making everything, and Moses is just kind of kicking back, letting the whole project take place, and when it's done, he comes and inspects the work and blesses it. In other words, yep, that's what I saw on the mountain. Pretty cool how the creative expression of these craftsmen produced these heavenly realities in the earth. And so God makes, the people make this tabernacle, and he comes and dwells there in like a manifested way. It's powerful. Now think about that for a second. That was God's intent from the very beginning, that he would live in a tent. His intent. That's good. All right. Sorry. I noticed puns. I like them. Think about that for a second, though. Because the reality of the heavenly temple never stopped existing. Okay? But now there was also an earthly one that was a copy of that, and somehow the two superimposed, and God dwelled in a manifest way in both of them. It was the tabernacle was a place where heaven and earth converged.
Yeah.
Do you see it? And then later, Solomon builds this temple that is a copy of the tabernacle, but it's also a copy of the temple in heaven. And there, God fills the temple with his presence, and it's so thick that the priests can't even stand. Wow. Now, I recently saw a map, a drawing of, I think it was the second temple, but I'm not sure which one, but this temple had all these rooms all around the outside, and they were dwelling places. He says, in my Father's house there are many rooms, or dwelling places is really more accurate to the original Greek there. Many dwelling places. He's talking about the temple in heaven that he's going to, right? Not the temple on earth.
Yeah.
But you know what else is cool is in John chapter 1, verse 14, it says that the Word, meaning Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us. And the Greek word there for dwelt is literally pitched a tent or tabernacled among us. God dwelled in him in his fullness, right? Jesus demonstrated. He fulfilled this whole temple thing and came and lived it and was it and expressed it in the earth. Jesus became the place where heaven and earth converged. You see?
Yeah.
Okay, it's going to get better. Hang tight. He says, in my Father's house there are many dwelling places. The Greek word for dwelling places there is only used 2 times in the entire New Testament. Okay? The first is right here. The second is in the same chapter, verse 23. Jesus replied, anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. The word for home there is the same Greek word that he used for dwelling place. Think about this for a second. His Father's house in heaven has many dwelling places.